Committee on Tuesday, July 18th, 2023. Please join me. Wow. He's trained. Item on our agenda, public comment. We have any public comment here in the building or anyone online, Catherine?
We don't have anybody online except for Jeff. Jeff, I'm sorry, I didn't mean to say. I certainly didn't mean to say Jeff wasn't online.
It's someone.
I do have public comment,
You do have public comment?
just a quick brief one, and it's related to the agenda. And if you're looking at the agenda package on items 4A and 4B, the name of the individuals who are going to be presenting those items has been reversed. Kelly will be doing the leak adjustment, and I will be taking care of the R&R rate ordinance and policies. The staff reports and all the handouts are correct. It was just a mix up on these two particular items that are listed on the agenda.
Okay, excuse me, you're talking about 4A and 4B?
4A,
That-
4B.
Yes, ma'am.
Switching,
No, we're just switching who's presenting.
that's what I meant, yes.
Yes.
Yeah, we got to figure that out. Thanks, Jeff.
You're welcome.
Item 2, approval of minutes. Want to move to approve the minutes? I move to approve the minutes. Okay, second. The minutes are approved. New business, 3A, Jeff Meyer, report on the monthly financial reports for June the 23.
Yes, Chairman Ratterman and Director Underhill, the items that before you on this report, I just want to caution everyone that these are unaudited numbers. We're still going through the process of closing out fiscal year 22-23. That means both the revenue and the expenditure side. On the revenue side, there's actually some more rate revenues that are going to be coming in. We still have the July billing that should be going out this week, and about 75% of that rate revenue will be apportioned to fiscal year 22-23. And in the July billing, the August billing, since this is a 2-month billing, 1/4 of it will be for 22-23. So those numbers that you see under sales and charges will go up, and I'm assuming, and based on what we see, probably be real close to 100%. On the expenditure side, we're still having claims come in for last fiscal year, so that's going to be changing over the course of the next several weeks as well. And this will probably be the last time you'll see the June 22-23 report until the audit is complete. And then at that time, we'll report back to you with the final numbers. But all in all, we're doing pretty darn good as far as both on the revenue and the expenditure side. I know we have a full agenda today. If there are any specific questions you have on the operating revenues and expenses, I can address those. Otherwise, I don't have a whole lot to point out.
Okay, I don't have any questions on the budget status report. June 2023. Just to have some coordination between the agenda itself and the agenda packet. Would it be possible, maybe I don't know if I put it together, what Becca's doing for us, because we need more help up here. It's put in a page in between that says 3A, and everything behind 3A is the agenda packet for that item on 3A on the agenda. And then just because it happens to be called June 23 budget status report in the packet, And then on our agenda, it's called report on the monthly financial report for June 23, pre-audited. It's been pre-audited.
Yeah.
Anyway, just different terminology, just to make it more, I mean, not only for us, but for anyone who's looking at the agenda and trying to put it together.
Yes.
Okay, thanks. 3B, Jeff Myers. Where does 3B start?
Page 8. You're looking at the space and the
Right.
right.
Thank you. Okay. Jeff, are you ready for,
I am.
3B?
Yes, I
Okay.
am. And
Bertha, do you have any
3B,
questions on 3A?
I didn't get a packet, so I'm just,
You have
just joining you.
that should be
No,
on
you don't
page
have to
go
23.
Okay, go ahead, Darren.
This item is for information only. It is the report on the fourth quarter investment activities, again, pre-audit. And page 23 on the report, please.
Page
There
18.
isn't, there haven't been many changes in this from quarter to quarter. We do have a little bit more money in our Umpqua account. And this particular item, it's about a $2.8 million change. This increase is due in part to the second property tax apportionment that came in the fourth quarter, I'm sorry. We get 3 allocations in property tax, the first one in January, the second one in May, and then there's a supplemental that comes out in August, which is a very small amount. But we did receive that fourth quarter property tax allocation. We also moved some money from LAIF into Umpqua in anticipation of some CIP expenses. We haven't needed that, and we're going to be moving that back into LAIF. Any questions on this report?
Yeah.
Okay, because, I recognize or I remember the fact that we took most of our investment and financials and went into Chandler. And we were going to cut back on LAIF, right?
Mhm.
Okay, but that's an appreciable amount that we still have in LAIF. And
Right.
that's,
It wasn't all of it, right?
it wasn't
We didn't move everything out of play.
right. No, yeah, okay. So we're good with the percentage we have in Chandler and LAIF. I mean, that
Yes.
seems to be working the best for us.
Yes, it does. And one of the advantages of LAIF, Director Underhill, is that we can access that cash within 24
Right.
hours.
I remember that. Yes,
And with Chandler, some of those are in short-term, long-term investments. And if we need the money, we could potentially have a penalty as far as selling them. Not so much a penalty that says we're going to charge you an extra 10% for selling it early, but if the value of the bond decreases, and if we're invested in bonds, it decreases, we may have to sell it at a loss. So we use LAIF as more of a bank account for us to be able to manage our ongoing operating needs and CIP needs. Chandler is more of a long-term investment. They also manage our water loan and sewer loan proceeds. And right now, LAIF is doing quite well, actually.
and that's interesting because remember how many, well, it was a few years where, LAIF struggled as far as as far as the investment was concerned and didn't give us the interest on our money. And so that was why we made the change, right?
That is correct. And at that particular point in time, however, when you think about it, everybody's investments or returns were quite low. And now that we're looking at a little better return on our investments, LAIF is coming up and is doing quite well, actually. I'm looking at their rates. The daily rate for LAIF for July 12th was 3.3%. Now, that's not as high as some of the interest rates we can get on long-term investment, but that's a really good rate for short-term investments.
Okay.
Anything further on that, Mr. Myers?
No, sir.
Okay, we'll move on to item 3C, report on deferred deleted fiscal year 23-24 budget items.
Yes, sir. This item is in response to the budget discussion we had when your board adopted the fiscal year 23-24 operating and CIP budgets on June 28th. We had came back to when we submitted the preliminary budget on June 14th, we ended up having to come back to the board on the 28th with a reduced budget for a number of reasons. Some of it is to bring down the cost of the budget. The other one was to look at where we stood on in relationship to our rate study. So as part of that process of looking at reducing the budgets, we made approximately $736,000 in budget reductions. That included $510,000 in capital outlay, $226,000 in services and supplies. In addition to that, we identified several budgeted items that we were going to defer until the rate hearing in September, making sure that we did not spend money that we may not have. When I say that, I'm looking at the proposed rate increase and looking at what could actually happen on September 13th. So just to be on the conservative side, we decided we identify a number of budgeted items that we will defer until we actually get through that Prop 218 rate hearing. And if you can please scroll down to the next page, Catherine. This is a draft report that I put together, and Catherine and I reviewed it and came up with what we think is a usable format for those items that we propose to defer. Most of those are in capital outlay, as you can see. There's about $540,000 in total of deferred items, 260 or 259,000 in water, 280 in sewer. And what we will be doing is, as we go forward in future reports in August, September, October, so we will be identifying if there are any expenditures for these particular items. We also have that for a deferred budgeted item under service and supplies. That's in the water in Department 54 operations. And that's an arc flash assessment for the sewer, which we're going to defer until after the Prop 218 hearing. My reason for bringing this format to you is twofold. One is in response to your board's request for us to track these items. The second is the format, and hoping that you will give us some feedback on the format that may make it a little bit more user-friendly for your board and your committee, or just say, hey, Jeff and Catherine, this looks great. You can move forward with it.
I think it'd make a little bit more sense if those numbers in this chart added up to the numbers in the report. I mean, we were talking about the adopted operating budget included expenditures, and then there was reductions or deferred items of 510,000. I'd like to see that number. Where's 510, 261 in a spreadsheet, and then the second number is 225,803 in services and supplies.
That's what I'd like to see is those numbers in a chart as to how we got to those numbers.
For the
On deferred
reductions,
items. For deferred, I mean, we're just talking about deferred and deferred items, but then the numbers don't match the chart.
okay, and if I can go back to the staff report, and this is probably, and I apologize for the confusion, this 510,000 were actually permanent budget reductions. We reduced
Okay.
the budget by this amount. The deferred items are items that are still in the budget, but we are not purchasing them until after the Prop 218 here.
Oh,
Does that kind of make sense to do it like that?
Which part?
Well, when you're talking about the reductions and, when you're playing with the budgeted items and then you're going to be bringing it back after 218 and,
No. So the goal here is not to bring it back after the rate study. We wanted to adopt the full budget.
Okay,
But-
and then I'm good with that. Yeah.
Right. But we also didn't want to spend the full amount of what is in the proposed rate increase until after such time that we're sure that that's what the revenue will be. So that's what we mean by deferred. We're just deferring it until after we have certainty on what the rate increase will be. So October.
so these are items in the operating budget dash deferred budget items, capital outlay. The items that are listed here are items that would ordinarily be spent early in the fiscal year. We would have already started spending and using new rate money to do it, and they're being deferred. I don't get it. I mean, I can't imagine that we in the first August, I mean, in the first few months of our budget before October gets here, that we're spending more money than we had in the budgeted for the entire year. And if that's not the case, why are we doing anything?
So that's not what we're doing.
I know, but why are we doing anything if that's not the case? We have money in the budget that and maybe in the last 3 months, if we don't.
No, the money, the revenue in the budget includes the proposed rate increase.
Right, I got that. And that may be where our mistake was, and if we made a mistake at all.
I don't
But-
think it was a mistake. This is what we intended to do all along,
Okay.
and this is what the.
But what
board
are
was
we
okay
trying to
with.
do here? What is?
All we're doing here is showing, so the board asked us to come back with, demonstrate to us that you're not committing the board to a rate increase. And so if we went and spent all of this money on these items, the rate increase is kind of it would be a lot harder to have any flexibility, harder than it already is, in terms of what those numbers are, because we've already spent money that was assuming a rate increase.
By
So we're
approving
we're just
your
demonstrating
approval of the
that we are
budget.
holding off on significant expenditures so that we're not, come September, we're not saying to the board, we've already spent the money.
Right. So all of these items come out of, or these are capital outlay requests from my department. And so really, generally what happens is I come with a list of requests to Michael and Jeff, and we sit down and we discuss whether or not it can be budgeted. So this is after other requests have been culled from that list. So I might have a list of 20 things. Hey, I'd like to get a backhoe. I'd like to get a this. I'd like to get a that. And then we cull it down through the budgeting process. Okay, you're not getting the backhoe this year, ask for it next year. And these are the things that ended up in the approved budget presented to you. However, in consideration of the fact that you also are in the midst of anticipating a rate adjustment, like Michael said, the objective is not to spend money that perhaps would not be there at the end of this Prop 218 process. So when Jeff says that he and Catherine will be reviewing this periodically to make sure there's no expenditures on these items, I can tell you, as a matter of fact, there won't be, because these come out of my department, and I would approve the purchases of all these items. And then to highlight even more, so with vehicles, the lease program, we have a quantity of 8. the top item, that was originally a quantity request of 12. So even to these items, the vac trailer, obviously that was a vac truck. So these have also been compromised to the point of what makes sense for the district financially and what can we fit in into the approved budget. And then to take it one step further, generally, Director Ratterman, to answer your question earlier, after July 1, I'm on the phone with the purchasing agent and saying, get me some quotes. We're going to move forward on this, and this. Well, that's not the case this year. That's not going to happen until October, ideally.
Right, and it's just to maintain that flexibility. If the proposed rate increase goes into effect, we don't have to touch the budget. This stuff's already in it. We can move forward. If it's something else, then we might have to cut some of what is,
Okay.
some of what is shown.
Got it. Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you, Jeff. All right, no, I
Certainly.
understand. And yeah, I understand what it is doing now and why it's here. And yes, to answer your previous question, Jeff and Catherine, it does look like this is in a good format to present to the board.
Thank you, Director Ratterman. And
And it
on
is
top
under-
of that, I'm
I don't
hoping,
know that we were planning on bringing it back to the full board. I thought the direction was just to present it to the finance committee and we'll keep
Well-
track of it.
Well, that was the question that Jeff asked, so I
Oh,
just
okay.
answered it in
Gotcha.
that same form. If you want to present it to the board, and I think it's in a good format.
Okay.
thank you. And as Damon said,
Why wouldn't you want to present it to the board?
I just didn't think it was something that needed to go to the full board. It was, I think the discussion we had at the board was to bring it to the finance committee and make sure we are tracking.
With everything that's going on, I don't think it needs to be, I don't think it's something that we need to detract from what we're doing with we don't need to talk about the budget right now, going forward. This is good information. It's been recorded here and
Yeah.
documented here. It doesn't need to be, I don't think, and if you're asking it to, that's a different story.
Well, no, I respect you and how you feel, I'm okay with it.
Okay, it does make sense exactly with what we're, with what we're doing and why we're doing it. And I
Yeah.
understand why things might, why as of July 1st, you might start ordering all this stuff and getting on it. And why we're having to delay and defer this year
Oh,
because of the way things timing wise
Uh-huh.
have worked out for this year. Okay,
and to follow up on that, Director Ratterman, I believe Director Cicada requested, we report back to the finance committee on this, and this is why we put together this report. And the full board gets the finance committee agenda package. So even though it's presented to your finance committee, they all get to take a look at it. And I will hold Damon to the fact that I expect to see zeros in those columns, July, August, September, and October, when we report back to you, that there will be no purchases. This is just a way to confirm that to your committee.
okay, then and we'll see this, and we'll see this little table then for those 3 months. Going forward, then we'll keep this on our agenda just to officially document it here
Certainly.
So,
on the finance committee, yeah. With a little piece of paper in front of it saying which item,
Yeah.
agenda item it is.
We
We
will
can
do
match
that.
it up. All right, and now,
I guess just one last point I want to make, just to make sure we're clear on everything, because I think this doesn't cover the full cost of the proposed rate increase. So this gets us a big chunk of the way, but there would be other cuts that would be required. If, for example, like in an extreme case, if there were zero, a zero rate increase, if we had no new revenue, we'd have to make even more cuts than what's shown here. But this is a pretty big chunk of it.
okay, thank you. But something that I asked to talk about, and I mean, because we don't have anything in the agenda packet, I do want to make it brief, but do kind of want to get some information about grants that
Yep.
we're currently working on. And this is item 3D in our agenda. Just what grants we're working on. I know we've got an old grant from probably, could be 15 years old by now, the one for Wilseyville, West Point consolidation of the wastewater treatment plants. That one's been around for a long, long time. But what other ones do we have that we're applying for, that we're working on, that are circulating from department to department and getting all the input that we need from everybody? And who's doing that these days with our current staffing?
Good. So I'm glad you started it that way, because that was kind of where I wanted to start too, was in terms of staffing. And then I'll give a little bit of an update as to where we are, and grants that we're working on. But it has been evolving over the last couple of years. So there was a period of time where it was really the external affairs manager and the engineering department that was leading the effort to identify and apply for new grants. It's every substantial grant, depending on the grant. But if it's a big infrastructure project, every department is involved. It requires, a huge amount of
Input
work.
from,
Yeah, and it's a lot of coordination between departments. And so the West Point Wilseyville grant, if I remember correctly, was initially applied for in 2014. It's a great example of just how much work goes into getting all that together. And then we were denied pending a rate increase because the district's financials didn't meet the standards for the water board. So it was on hold for a while until, that's when I got here and picked it up, was we were in the process of basically reapplying or having our financials reevaluated by the water board in order to demonstrate that we meet those requirements and we're eligible for the grant funding. And then it moved forward from there to finding out that the project cost had gone up significantly since the initial grant award. And so having to reapply for an increase in the dollar amount. So yeah, that one's been a very long process. The good news is it's halfway through construction now. Yeah, so it's well on its way. But
And is it still planning on being 100% funded?
100% grant funded. Yeah,
Okay.
so we got the dollar amount was increased from, I think initially it was 5.
Look,
Just under 5, and it's now almost 10.
That's correct.
That's USDA?
No, that's a water board grant.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. So since then, we've had some turnover in those positions and in those departments. So we've had kind of, different, Jessica had started a grant coordination program that she never really had time to sink her teeth into. John Griffin had started a different approach to grant coordination.
And Joel before him had got his fingers in it. That's one of the reasons why I'm
Right.
asking about
So
where.
but I think the important message I want to give is that even with that, we haven't missed any opportunities. Every project that we put forward, we're always looking to identify potential sources of funding. As soon as Mark got here, we had the conversation of, okay, here's where it's been. Here's, the discussions we've been having recently, because we've also, we interviewed a grant consultant a few months ago and got a proposal from them. It's a referral that we got from Amador Water Agency, a service that provides, they look at your projects, they look at your CIP projects, they look at the different sources of funding that are out there and the criteria for each grant, and they try to match those up for you. That's something we're still evaluating, whether we need to outsource that or once we have once we're back up to full staff, because we're also short an engineering coordinator right now. Once we're back fully staffed, is that something that we're comfortable handling in-house as we've done in the past? And we've have a pretty successful track record when it comes to grants. So we definitely are kind of on the verge of reestablishing a more systematic grant coordination program. That's, now that we're fully staffed on the management team, we're getting there in the engineering department. We still have 2 vacancies in the engineering department, but I think we're on our way to, making a lot of progress on that front. We currently have 9 grants in process or in progress. We've been awarded the grant funds and they are being implemented. So there's been no shortage, even though we would and we will have a more, organized and systematic approach. Once we fully develop that, We haven't missed any opportunities. We're always
There's not-
aggressively looking for grants.
Is the 9 include the Wilseyville?
Yep.
West Point? And the other 8 have
So
been accepted or approved?
Or
He said they were
some of them are
granted.
even close to close out. So that also includes
Yeah.
the AMR, AMI, which only a portion of that was grant funded. Most of that was low interest financing, and we ended up never even, we brought the cost of the project in under. So that's all a low interest loan, but there was a grant component to that program. That was part of what we were after. Redwood Tank Hazard Mitigation Project is nearly complete. That's a FEMA grant funded project. Hunter's Raw Water Pump Project. It is FEMA funded the planning and design stage of that project. We're waiting for final approval for the construction funding for that project to come forward, but we're hoping this year.
Yeah. Yep.
West Point, Wilseyville, already talked about the sewer consolidation project, but the water supply reliability project is the second water treatment filter in West Point. That was through the MAC IRWM, a DWR funded grant. So it's a partially funded grant project. We've got, and then let's see what else. Other FEMA funded projects. So the 2017 storm event, 2019 storm event, the current 2022-2023 storm event, and the critical facility standby generator implementation program. Those are all grant applications that we're in the process of. Damon's been in the lead on all of those. So those are all grants that either have been awarded and are being implemented, or we're just working through the process of getting the funds from FEMA, essentially. So
Because didn't we ask this same question at the board level? We asked. for
Yeah,
a
as a
status of-
result,
yeah.
this is what we're getting today.
Uh-huh,
Right.
okay, and so
Army Corps too.
it's being funneled through here, and then it will be presented.
Well, that's the next, that's
we
my
can
request.
bring it to the board.
Could you
yeah.
put this in a table?
Yeah, with a little more time, we can put it together in a
Dollar
presentation if we
figures
want.
included, time,
Yeah,
dates
that's-
and
yeah.
time.
Absolutely.
Okay,
And so the other, happy to do that. The other big one, thank you, Damon, is the Army Corps funding for Copper Cove
Oh, right.
wastewater.
right.
Which isn't a traditional grant program, that's a legislative appropriation, but it's part of the effort to consistently, go after any sources about external funding that we can find for infrastructure.
No, and that'd be perfect on that list.
So that would be the
The-
10th of the list that I'm looking at right now. The one, and then just also to because we don't get them all, and and I think it's important to remember how competitive some of these grant programs
Oh,
are.
absolutely.
And so last year we applied 3 different grant applications, and this is when what John Griffin was working on, 3 different grant applications for a total of, I think it was around $34 million, 3 different water fund projects, and we didn't get any of them.
So I'd like to see those on the list too.
Sure,
I mean, it
that's
just
why I'm
shows
recording.
an effort. Okay, good.
Yeah, we'll
The other-
provide, we can put it in a presentation
And
and
I don't want to spend a whole lot of time on this, but the other is there besides you, is there a desk that the grant, where the buck stops here, where the grants go up to that person besides to your desk? Is there someone else that you're going to designate in this building that's going to be in charge
Yeah.
of grants?
so I think where the direction we're going in, and Mark and I have had some conversations about this. I think once we get a new engineering coordinator in place, that person is probably going to play the role of taking on kind of where we left off with what we were building with Jessica in terms of just the grant coordination and project management role.
Okay.
And so it really is an engineering led function because we're largely searching for funding for infrastructure projects.
Okay.
So it's going to be led by the engineering department. The engineering coordinator will be the one that is, keeping it all organized, keeping track of everything, including, the ongoing in coordination with finance, the reporting requirements, the reimbursement requests, the once that we were awarded the grant, the administration of the grant. So that'll largely be funneled through the engineering coordinator, but with, like I said, a lot of input from other departments as well. And then we'll have to talk. I mean, Damon has taken on a huge work effort when it comes to the FEMA grants, and that was partly just because sometimes that makes sense for operations to be in the lead on, because those are really, operations is boots on the ground in terms of assessing those projects. If it's, so if it's a damage reimbursement application, maybe we keep that in operations. If it's a local hazard mitigation grant program, maybe that is an engineering driven process. But that's one thing I think we still need to figure out as a team, what the best way to administer those two different approaches are. And then currently the one that we're really hoping for is Arnold Wastewater Treatment, which is it's a big project. We're close to, I think, ready to put it out to bid, environmental engineering design, all done. But when we mapped the service area for Arnold Wastewater, because Arnold as a whole is not a disadvantaged community, but there are segments within there that are. And so when we mapped just the service area that the Arnold Wastewater Treatment Plant serves, I think that might qualify barely, but might qualify. And so we decided not to put that out to bid yet. We have a pre-application in with the water board to see if that is a grant eligible project. That's one that we had identified when we did the infrastructure loan. That's one of the projects that's on the list. Critical project, probably is our estimate around 7 million.
Yeah. A little
Probably, yeah, a little bit over 7 million. If we could bring in grant funds for that project, it frees up the infrastructure loan funds for another project. So that would be a huge win for us.
Did you have a question?
Yeah.
There.
Okay,
Yes.
a lot of this is going to be on the shoulders of new hires, right? Is that what you're saying? Is that what I heard?
It's both. It's,
Yeah.
but I think the important point I want to make though is we're not letting anything slip while we've had turnover. It's, I think we're going to get to a place where it's, we're back to something that's more systematic and organized and maybe easier to report out on. And I think that's where I need to do a better job of making sure the board is aware that we're always aggressively funding external aggressively seeking external sources of funding, even if I'm not reporting out on it enough. And that is, I'll prioritize that. That's an ongoing effort. I mean, we're never going to stop doing that with every project. If it's moving forward, we're going to be evaluating potential funding sources.
So then the job will be shared by an additional 2 positions that you want to fill? Is that?
No, they're existing positions. So the engineering coordinator is the one that I think will be sort of the hub and will be tracking our progress. And then as new projects are in development, as they're in design, or even before in some cases, if we think they might be eligible for planning funding, that's when we're going to evaluate each project for potential sources of available funding. I think one of the other points I wanted to make though is these programs are very competitive. We're gonna always seek those grants, but most of our service areas are not disadvantaged communities, and that's what both state and federal sources of funding are prioritizing heavily. So we're gonna try to get as creative as we can in working within those parameters. But these are very competitive grant programs, even though there's a lot of infrastructure funding that's out there.
We'll just see what's out there and go after what we can.
We'll go after
What I'm looking
whatever.
for is reporting here and just knowing, and it sounds like Mark is going to be in your wheelhouse, or reporting up to you. And once we create this document of what we got going on right now, if we could keep that as a living document and then just report for your department
Progress on it.
to our board, full board once a quarter on where we're at with what new ones have come in line. And then if we could just do that going forward, that's a request for today.
I think that's a good idea. Yeah,
Okay.
absolutely.
The other thing I wanted to bring up on the same subject is some sort of a shared a cost sharing. I mean, it seems to me that if you, and I don't know if this is the case, that if one district dedicated enough time, you could almost fund a position with doing this. If we were successful. I mean, if it could pay the salary and that's all that person did, and I don't know if that would work. Throw an idea out there. The other idea is just to, get together with AWA, CPUD, Valley Springs, Utica, UPUD, I mean, whoever, get together with TUD and share a service like you're talking about, a service that does that. To what would it cost us, and to what extent would it help us?
Yeah.
And just bring a bigger focus onto grants and public funds, eligible public funds that are out there that if we did something like that, we might have, not that we haven't had good success in the past, but we might have better success and a better track record of going forward.
Yeah, I think it's worth considering, and we'll discuss whether that's a better option, using a consultant, rather than, continuing to do it in-house. I think those consultants, the way they're gonna focus on one agency at a time rather than a
Yeah, because,
share. Even though I think a lot of the sources, we have so much in common, especially with Amador and TUD. We're such similar agencies. The funding opportunities are very similar. The big difference we have is we're upstream. TUD and CCWD are upstream of a big federal facility. So that opens up even more doors for us than maybe Amador might be eligible for. But the consultant's going to target your priorities, your CIP, and then try to match that up with funding sources for each agency. I think the cost for just that service, to get a periodic report from a consultant, is not that high of a cost. The cost comes in, the real cost comes in is if you want that consultant to help prepare the application documents for you, or grant administration efforts. They'll also take those roles on as well, and that's when the cost starts to climb. But we're actively looking at whether we want to use that model with a consultant or continue to keep it in-house.
Okay. All right, that's
Because of the-
enough.
We can report back to the board on that as well.
Okay, good.
Just one more statement, and that's because of the sharing. How are you going to share?
Well, I think when it comes to staffing, it gets really complicated really quickly to try to share a staff person. And so I think if we were to outsource, if we needed additional assistance on this front, I mean, we'll look at all the options. I suspect we would probably use a consultant that is very cost effective at providing that service, rather than a full-time employee that's going to become very difficult to manage when cost sharing with other agencies.
Okay. We'll wait to hear and see what we get.
Uh-huh.
Okay, moving on to old business. The update on leak adjustment procedures, Kelly Richard.
Oh, here we are.
Good afternoon, Director Underhill, Director Ratterman.
Hello.
I am here to provide you with an update on our leak adjustment process, which falls under our credit adjustment policy here at the district. So as you're aware, this is a provision of the credit adjustment policy where we are able to review customer accounts for any kind of anomalous water consumption, and then be able to provide them a credit on their account for these situations once every 5 years. Part of our dedication to our policies and procedures, obviously for any department, is to, discuss these and evaluate these on an occasional basis to make sure that we are providing this adjustment under industry best practices. And in comparison to other agencies that provide similar adjustments, they do utilize the consumptive amount as a means of calculating the adjustment versus the monetary billed amount, which is what staff here at CCWD has been doing for, I guess, the the length or the age of the adjustment policy itself. So really, it was more of a evaluation and analysis of really what makes sense and what is the best way to provide this adjustment, calculate this adjustment to the customer account. So really, this is more or less just an update to the procedure and how we calculate that internally for the customer. And it does not involve any kind of change to the ordinance itself. It just is an update to calculations. So really what we did is we adjusted to account for excess water used in the affected billing cycle compared to the same cycle the year prior. But instead of using the amount billed, because rates are not the same, they change normally every year. So you're not having an apples to apples comparison when you're looking at that excess. And really, when we're talking about excess, we're talking about consumption, we're talking about usage. And so really you want that to be the basis for the calculation. When we're using consumption, we're able to use that comparison basically to say, here's what historically they used in that same billing period last year. Here's what they used this year when they had some sort of, abnormal event or leak. And then we take that difference in usage and then we provide them 50% of that monetary compensation. We were not doing that before. We were taking what we billed them last year for that billing period, what we billed them this year for that billing period, and giving them 50% of the billed difference. We really need to be looking at consumption and water in excess and using that as the basis for the calculation. So we have proposed a change to the process itself, the calculation itself, to better align with what we believe will be a more justifiable and consistent calculation for the adjustment, and then alignment with industry standards for these types of credits.
Just to make sure I understand, could you do a calculation of the same numbers and what it used to be, and then a calculation of what the new
I'll give a comparison of
yeah.
what it is now and what we're changing it to.
right.
Sure. So if we had a customer who, experienced a leak at their property, they called in to let us know that they had it repaired, but that it, had significantly impacted their bill, and they were looking to see what type of credit or reprieve they could get for that billing period. Right now, what we would do is we would be able to go in and see within the system, and obviously we have to bill for that period so that we can have that
and come up with
amount.
a number.
Okay, so if we bill out for 2,000 cubic feet of consumption, in that same period last year, they only used 500 cubic feet. So obviously they had a significant increase in that consumption for that period of time. The way we're doing it now is we would go into that billing period for last year where there was 500 cubic feet of consumption, and we would see, okay, we billed them out for X amount.
Which is going to be a lesser per unit figure than it is currently.
Than it is
because of
currently.
rates. Okay.
Correct. So we're taking that billed amount from last year for that billing cycle. We're taking the current billed amount for this affected billing cycle. We're calculating that monetary difference and then giving them 50% of that difference. When really, as you just said, it's not an apples to apples comparison. The rates are not the same.
Okay.
So really what we're trying to look at also.
So they would be getting a little bit less of a credit in this new way of doing it.
A little bit
if we
less.
raise rates every year.
Correct.
Okay.
Yes. And so this shift we would be looking at the consumptive amount, the 500 cubic feet for last year, the 2,000 cubic feet for this year, that 1,500 cubic foot difference, calculating that 1,500 with today's rate and giving them 50%
And
of
we
that.
used to use last year's rate.
Correct.
Okay, and that would make no sense. Director Thomas has talked about this subject, and
Yes.
he'd like to see us not charge either one of those consumptive rates on water that leaks out and pours down the hill. He wants to use the rate that we use for pulling it, we talked about this
He wants to
briefly.
see a comparison of basically the
If someone brought a truck to a
the
spigot,
hydrant meter. thank you.
Right.
Yeah.
Hydrant meter rate compared to the tiered rate that a customer would pay.
right?
Which I think is, how, the hydrant meter rate is,
It needs,
how does that compare to?
and the answer he's been getting is that it's, you know, we've already treated that water, we've already pumped it through the system, we've used the entire system of getting it to him, but of getting it to that customer. But then his argument is that, but they weren't able to take advantage of it. It just fell out of the pipe and washed down the hill. And the water looks like water that comes, you know, that could be delivered from a truck. But and he wants to see if we could give a credit on that, all that excess water that nobody used. Well, it's like buck in the ground, and maybe some of it got back to us.
I think I think if I understand his argument correctly, I think he's more just concerned about the cost comparison and making sure that we're not charging customers more for water that.
Well, I think he'd
we-
like to charge them less, much less, based on what somebody can go get water for, what you can replace that
Right, he
water.
wants to see the cost comparison between those things.
Yeah, with, you know, getting it, you know, if you all that water, that 1,500 that we're talking about, that washes down the hill, if we bought that out of a truck, you know, is that what we should be charging them, or can we charge them what we charge somebody out of a truck? Which is probably the least amount, maybe.
It's the per unit cost of water. So for 1 unit of water, what does that cost? $1.08. It was $1.08 at one point in time, you know. And then with the hydrant meter, there's also a deposit charge. So they pay a deposit for the meter, which I think is the value of the meter itself, $1,300. And then they pay a maintenance fee. There's a couple other smaller administrative fees, and then they pay the per unit cost for water. So if it's a 2,500 gallon water truck, they, you know, get 3 units of water. That's roughly 2,500 gallons they're paying.
Is it tied to the rate, to the tiers in the rate schedule, or is that established separately?
I believe it is tied to the first unit tiers, so the first tier level, and as that adjusts based on whatever the rate is approved at the time, July 1, it's going to change.
Yeah, that would make sense.
It will change, but the deposit is kind of a significant component for a hydrant meter, because you're essentially, you know, your skin in the game, so to speak, is that you've paid that $1,300 for the deposit. You're going to keep that meter safe. And then moreover, if you're not watching your hydrant meter, and this happens to us periodically, you don't put a lock on it. And somebody comes by, you know, and you've got it in a busy place, and they take water out of that hydrant meter, you're paying for that water.
Now, the hydrometer we're talking about is what we get a contractor to
That's
keep
correct.
for dust on construction
Yeah,
projects.
and then generally what happens is,
Did that $1,300, they get it back?
that's correct.
So that should be part of the fee then. That's a deposit
It's deposit.
here.
It's a deposit.
Okay.
That's right.
But that's what are we planning on bringing this
So I think
policy?
that to me seems like a different component of this that maybe would be appropriate for the engineering committee, where Director Thomas could participate in that discussion.
So we presented that at the engineering committee multiple times this past year. But we do have a staff report and information that we can convey to finance
Okay.
committee as well, if you
Sure,
need to see that information.
Well, I don't necessarily need to see that, but is this leak adjustment procedures being brought to the full board for possibly new policy?
This would have to be an ordinance. This would be adopted by ordinance if we were to go this route. Is that correct?
So
This is just a change to procedure and not a change to the ordinance.
When I saw ordinance in there,
This is just a change in how we calculate it, and
Okay.
it's merely informational.
okay,
But I am aware, obviously, of, you know, Director Thomas's concerns in regards to the comparison between residential tiered rate and the hydrant meter rate, for water consumption. So that would be something completely
water
separate.
loss.
For water
It's only
loss,
for those
correct.
water loss and the possible adjustments is what and I see his point. I mean, I'm not positive that I agree totally with it, but I want to hear from everybody on that subject.
Right.
this would be an amendment to the ordinance, not just a procedural change, is my understanding.
if there are gonna be some changes made, right?
Not the change.
current process is laid out in district ordinance.
The process is laid out in the ordinance, but the verbiage is vague. It does not specify how it is calculated.
Oh, interesting. Okay.
Right.
So it's just cleaning up.
It's just cleaning up
Mm.
how we're doing it and not necessarily changing the ordinance because the ordinance does not specify like how it's calculated.
Okay. You know, these are gonna, I'm anticipating we're gonna see less and less of these going forward.
And that was
These
my next.
These big water loss, problems because of what we're, well, I don't know how, I was
Well-
gonna think, cause all the work that we're doing, but if they're not doing work on their side of the meter and that's where these problems occur,
Well, that's.
how
where
will
the
we see
smart-
less?
Yeah, so that's where the smart meter portal comes in.
Oh.
That's where the alerts come in.
Okay,
We're able to let customers know, or the system is able to let customers know in a timelier fashion that
if they
there
set it
is,
up.
if they set it up.
Yeah.
However, through Centrix, which is our database, we're able to receive alerts on our side as well for abnormal customer consumption.
Oh,
So even if the customer is not set up for alerts within their portal, within their customer portal, we can still set thresholds on our side of the system to be able to see those abnormal consumptive trends.
And
okay.
then you take that and you,
And
Notify
you
the
take
customer.
that and we are able, we obviously will have to generate a process in-house for how we're going to address those. But it is much timelier than reading the meter every 2 months and finding that for the past 2 months, there's been an issue, which would then result in significant water loss, significant impact to the customer, not only on the build, for the bill, but also for their repair in general. But so we are anticipating, obviously, as we move forward with AMI, as we have this data at our fingertips, more readily available, that we have these alerts, that we, engage the customers to set up alerts as well, that we'll be able to, mitigate a lot of these problems very quickly with, the goal is to have minimal impacts then financially to the customer and less water loss for us.
how close are you?
I just wanted to add something to answer your question. To what Kelly was saying is I've already issued work orders to distribution staff because I received alerts based on excessive consumption, reverse flow, tampering. And so we already have, and that's through the work order process. So we submit a work order. Hey, can you guys check this? This is high flow. We need to let this customer know if there's a leak. And then they go out and investigate and perhaps knock on the door, and then they complete the work order and give a write-up in the summary of what work was done. Talk to the customer, everything seems to be in order. They have a large garden, or whatever it might, oh, in fact, there was a leak, let them know, they were very thankful, that kind of stuff. So over time, we'll develop this repository, so to speak, of work orders that we can then review and
Okay.
trend and based on.
It sounds like it's already started. Good.
Yeah, it's already started.
And so then the work order comes back to you and you make an adjustment with the customer.
Well, that's what we need to
Yeah, yeah.
determine in-house, because then what we do, or ultimately what you'd like to do with a system like this is if the customer is not set up for alerts or they're not enrolled in the customer portal, you let them know the significance of that we were able to, provide, go out and assess this particular situation, but we'd like you to enroll in the portal so that, you can receive these alerts in any of the fashions that you prefer, email, phone call, text, any of those options that best fit your needs.
Because we're not always going to be able to, respond to that work order as quickly as they would be able to if they were getting the work, if they were getting the alerts themselves.
So that would be a benefit you could,
Right.
Right.
could
So
tell
I
them
think
about
the-
Right.
Back to Director Adderman's initial point is, yes, we should be seeing fewer of these and smaller dollar amounts overall. Hopefully, going forward, that's
okay.
the case.
My next question is, what about with these corrected work orders? Are we making a monetary adjustment to our customer?
So it's on the customer, I think, to apply for the leak adjustment. And so we always make the customers aware of the fact that we have this program, they can apply for a leak adjustment. And as long as they fit the criteria of the program, then we can.
Okay, but
Make the
we've
adjustment.
discovered these. And
The same.
Right.
Kind of, the same statement Michael made would apply. It's, hey, you have the opportunity, should you so choose, to reach out to Kelly and her team and request the leak adjustment.
okay,
Right.
okay.
So currently, in conjunction with what, Damon is currently doing as far as sending these work orders out. Historically, what we've been doing for billing as a part of the billing process is that when we calculate the billing and we notice that there is an abnormally high amount of consumption, we have more recently been utilizing the Centrix database on our side to be able to go in and see if there's any indication of significant water consumption that may have resulted from a leak, irrigation being left on, a running toilet. Obviously, we don't know the specifics, but we can see that there is something out of the ordinary. And so as a part of our billing process, before we issue those bills, we make a list and we have our customer service reps call those folks to give them a heads up and let them know, hey, and it may be a situation that they're aware of. Oh, we left the hose running this one day. It was our mistake. We realized we did it. Sorry about that. But some people do not realize that they had a leak there. And then we also inform them that we have the leak adjustment as an option if they'd like to give us a call back.
Because, we know how many people are not here.
Right.
you know.
Right. And this is another benefit I think you and I have specifically talked about as far as this portal goes, having, these property owners with the secondary homes signing up for these things because they will get these alerts very quickly. So.
Yeah, and I would, just a side note, I would like, John to take on that, to make the customer aware of that provision. Just to let them know.
When
if-
it's live.
Mhm.
Oh,
Yeah,
you
I
mean
think-
for the options through the smart meter portal? Absolutely. That will be a part of the outreach and communication that goes out to our customers
Right.
for
Got
that.
it?
So I want to make one small comment about the potential of charging agricultural rates or
Oh.
any other rates for clients who've had leaks. There is a potential there for the gift of public funds. If you're subsidizing a person who had a leak with other ratepayers' funds.
Oh, right.
Just want to make you guys aware of that.
Right.
Yeah,
Well, there's no one in this room that we're proposing that any day. We were talking about it in the third party.
It's recorded.
Anything further on this?
No,
Kelly?
that is it.
All right, well, very good. Thank you very, very much.
Thank you.
Okay, we're gonna move on to old business 4B, update of R&R rate ordinance and policies. This will be Jeffrey Meyer. Tee it
Yes,
up.
Director Adamman, thank you. The genesis for this conversation, this item today, is really based in the rate study we're in the process of working on. And as you're all aware, back in 2013, when we adopted our rates and our rate ordinance, a very wise sage came up with what's called a capital renovation and replacement component of the rates. And this component has allowed us to really fund our capital improvement program, both through the construction of projects themselves, providing the grant match requirements that some grant entities require for the district, whether it's 25 or 50%. But it also allows us to issue debt, which we've done on 2 occasions, to help fund those infrastructure improvements, because as you're aware, costs have increased dramatically when it comes to these capital projects. The concern, though, is with the new rate structure, it does not include a capital R&R component per se based on this particular ordinance. However, it does allow us to have funding for future capital projects. And I know there's been a concern as to if we do away with this rate ordinance and no longer have a capital component built into the rate structure, how can we guarantee that a certain portion of our rate revenue is going to go to capital improvement because, as you're well aware, it's a huge component of our budget, and it will be for multiple years. We're here in perpetuity, and not all of these infrastructures last forever. Some of them have a 20-year shelf life, some of them have a 30. So we need to be able to have a reliable source of revenue for our capital program. So what we decided to do internally, in hearing the concerns of the board, is that how can we do that not as a portion of the rate ordinance, but create a separate ordinance that will dedicate a minimum level of funding to our capital program, both on the water and sewer side. In looking at our current policies and ordinances, which are attached to your agenda package, there are 3 items that address the capital R&R program. One is from Ordinance 2013-01, and I'm not going to read the whole thing, but it was a section that was added to the ordinance for use of additional revenues. It basically says the additional revenues through this rate increase are going to go for capital improvements. And just a reminder, the entire portion of the 2013 rate increase went to R&R. It did not supplement operating revenues. So the entire amount that was approved through that rate ordinance went to capital R&R. There's also 2 policies in the district's budget and fiscal policy, the capital improvement policy, section 5004, and the rate setting policies 500.7, that will also need to be addressed. Now, the difference between the existing rate ordinance and policies is the rate ordinance specifically says that these funds cannot be used for any other purpose without a 4/5 vote by the board of directors. And that's kind of been a standard for us because it's a very high threshold. Policies generally do not have that same threshold, especially if they're part of more policies, which the Financial Management Policy 5.00 is. It's a whole slew of policies, whether it's rates, whether it's accounting, whether it's reserves. But it does need to be in sync with what we're proposing for a new ordinance. And I put together a draft of a new ordinance to address the use of additional funds. And it is attached, and this is just a draft. This is the first blush at it for your committee to take a look at, provide input. I anticipate coming back to your committee again once we get some input and bringing it back in August, taking it to the full board in August for review. And since it is an ordinance, and that's what we're proposing here, is it will require a 2-week notification process in the local newspaper. So the timeline that I see right now is coming back to the board in September for adoption if this is a direction you so wish to go. But it still keeps in that 4/5 vote. It sets minimum funding levels based on the lesser of 2 items, whether it's I'm sorry, I froze here for a minute. It's a lesser of 2 items, one being the depreciation amount for each fund and the amount of R&R revenues currently received under the R&R program. And I know we're not finished yet with the fiscal year 2022-23, but it's approximately 3.4 million in water, 1.2 million in sewer. The depreciation for water is about 3.4, depreciation for sewer is 1.3. But we also want to need to have the flexibility that even though that's a minimum level, let's say we go out and issue more debt. We want to make sure that it's above and beyond the minimum level, because if we issue more debt, obviously those revenues will need to come from these capital improvement revenues. and that minimum threshold will no longer be adequate, especially if we're using some of these additional funds for capital projects. Both of those strategies are laid out in the policies, and you have a blue line that's part of your agenda package. I did include the original 2013-1 rate revenue for comparison, but I did not do a red line for the ordinance because it's actually creating a brand new ordinance not associated with any of the rates. And so it's very brief and to the point, and it will, if we go down this path, we will rescind the 2013-01 rate ordinance for use of additional revenues and replace it with a new capital funding ordinance. And I am
I think you laid that
available
out.
for questions and cross-examination.
I think you laid that out well. Actually, Michael and I had a conversation on this when we were talking about rates a couple months ago. And this is exactly what I was envisioning, is still having the 4/5 in there and having some sort of a way of mandating that the district continued with at least the amount of funding we used last year, this year on capital R&R. And so putting a number in there makes sense. And then using the at minimum, one of those two numbers, the depreciation or the actual dollar amount of CIP for 23-24. I like it the way it's written, unless there's just some language that needs to be cleaned up. I'm totally in favor of this.
That's good to hear, Director Reiterman, because I agree. I think this captures what we discussed. I think it locks in that commitment on the expenditure side rather than restricting us on the revenue side. I think one question, Jeff, that we should probably look into before bringing this to the full board is just kind of looking forward as we implement CIP projects. What is that depreciation going to look like? How is that going to change in the future? Is that number going to increase significantly? Just so that we have an understanding of how that might, if that ends up being the higher of the two.
Then these numbers will always be what we're having to spend, right? And we're spending much more than that every year.
Well, it's certainly on the expenditure side.
Isn't that the way it's written, that the depreciation, if the depreciation
The
is
greater of the annual depreciation expense?
No, it starts off at a minimum. At a minimum.
Right. So the floor will be set at either the annual depreciation or the current spending amount. So I just think having a little more detail on what that annual depreciation might be over time as we implement.
Is it the greater of those two numbers or
the greater of those? The floor is the greater of those two. So that's just a clarification.
Maybe it should read the lesser of those two and not the greater of those two. So that we have an actual dollar figure as the minimum we can spend.
Just the dollar amount and not.
Or just the dollar amount. I'm happy with just the dollar amount and throwing depreciation.
Really, that's what we're trying to capture, is that minimum level of expenditure for capital improvements.
Depreciation can sometimes get fuzzy depending on how you're calculating it and what you're using and the life expectancy and blah, blah, blah. I don't like that in there. That I'd feel much more comfortable with just a dollar number, and not just thinking about how it can be utilized or functioned or malfunctioned, as time goes on. Having a policy and ordinance that we don't want to have to change.
Right, and so we can work on that and bring it back to this committee and.
Okay.
But I think this is really close to the mark, Jeff. I think this is what we've been.
The reason that we wanted to do this is we had this tied in there with that rate, but if we're not understanding that, really hogtied the finance department and how these calculations, figuring all these different funds that you had to create to do that, to make sure that that section of rates back in 2013, 14, 15, that all went to CIP. It had to be red tagged and put into CIP, and now we've changed that. this is in replacement of that, still tying the district hands of spending money on CIP,
Right.
which is what we weren't doing prior to 2013. And we heard about it with a bunch of people in the room carrying pitchforks.
And so, yeah, exactly. This just takes the restriction on the revenue away, which is what causes a lot of complication, and shifts it over to the budgetary expenditure process where we have more
But
flexibility.
it's still an
But
ordinance
not-
saying,
but
it's
not
still
fully
accomplishing
fully.
the same thing.
Exactly.
You force this
Yes.
vote to change it and this is and a bunch of money going to CIP.
Yep.
That has to go to CIP, which is exactly what the creation of that CIP fund was the purpose for it when it was done in
Right.
2012. All right. Any comments, Bertha?
No.
Okay.
Then I have direction, Director Ratterman, and in working with Michael and maybe clean up the language a little bit, especially when it comes to the dollar amounts and depreciation. And we will bring this back to your next Finance Committee meeting in August for final review and then taking it on to the full board.
Yeah, and I'm thinking just that section 2 funding, if we just kept, so it was just a one number in there, it must be
Sure.
at least this number and forget about the depreciation. Okay, yes, you got it right. Perfect. All right. Thank you,
Thank you.
Jeff. Item 4C, update and on reminder and penalty and procedures. Kelly Richards, up again. I'm interested in hearing about this one.
I bet. All right, so I am here to recommend to the Finance Committee to re-implement the past due penalties and past due notices within the delinquency process. This is something that I think has been at the forefront of some discussions in the past, not only with the board, but on several other committees. So I'm here to speak on that today. We have since March 2020, after COVID-19 restrictions, and then obviously Governor Newsom's executive order in April of 2020 to, declare a state of emergency and executive moratorium on water shutoffs, CCWD has not been actively participating in the delinquency process and has simply been utilizing an annual teeter agreement with the county to send delinquent accounts to the tax
Exactly.
roll. And so part of the discussion that we've been having more recently is how to re-implement the delinquency process and how far do we want to re-implement the process in its entirety or in portions. I think we've discussed, some legislative legislation movements in the state that are indicating in the coming years that there could be we could be restricted legislatively from using water disconnection as a means of collection for outstanding accounts. We obviously have that teeter agreement. We'd like to go ahead and initially re-implement the past due penalty and past due notices process of the delinquency or those two parts of the delinquency process, because we believe that this will lead to a decrease in outstanding receivables and then a decline in the number of exceptionally